Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. The aroma of grilled chicken and charcoal smoke still clung to my clothes, a pleasant reminder of Linda and Bob's annual summer barbecue. It had been a good night, one of those comfortable, easy evenings with friends we'd known for what felt like a lifetime. My husband, Tom, had been his usual sociable self. Though he'd ducked out a little earlier than planned, muttering something about an early golf game he couldn't miss, I didn't mind. It was typical Tom. He loved his routines. I'd lingered, enjoying the last of the fireflies starting their nightly dance against the deepening twilight and the comfortable chatter of old friends. But now, the party was winding down. People were gathering their cooler bags and leftover potluck dishes, exchanging tired but happy goodbyes. I found myself near the driveway, saying my thanks to Linda, when Richard approached. Richard. Tom's friend Richard. He'd always been a fixture in our lives, a steady, reliable presence, much like his friendship with Tom. He was a good man, a little quieter than Tom, perhaps more thoughtful, with kind eyes that always seemed to be observing, understanding. Tonight, he'd been particularly engaging, or maybe I'd just been more receptive. We'd had a surprisingly long conversation about old movies, a shared passion Tom never quite understood. "Jessica, do you need a ride?" Richard's voice was calm, a pleasant baritone that always felt reassuring. "I'm heading your way." I hesitated for a moment. I'd driven myself, but the thought of navigating the dark country roads alone suddenly felt less appealing than it had a few hours ago. My car, bless its aging engine, had been acting a little temperamental lately. "Oh, Richard, that's so kind of you. Are you sure it's not out of your way?" "Not at all," he said with a small, genuine smile. "My car's right here. We can swing by tomorrow for yours, or Bob can keep an eye on it." Linda, overhearing, chimed in. "Oh, leave it, Jessica. Bob will make sure it's safe. Go on, get a ride with Richard." And just like that, it was settled. It seemed so simple, so practical. A quick ride home from my husband's friend. Nothing more, nothing less. I'd taken rides from Richard before, usually with Tom in the car or in a group. This felt a little different, but not in an alarming way. Just quieter, more singular. We said our goodbyes, and I followed him to his car, a comfortable-looking sedan, much newer than my sputtering compact. He opened the passenger door for me, a small gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that Tom rarely remembered these days. It wasn't a criticism of Tom, just an observation. Tom's ways were different, more boisterous, less refined. The interior of Richard's car was clean, smelling faintly of leather and something else, something subtle and pleasant I couldn't quite name. It was an organized space, unlike the cheerful chaos of my own vehicle, which usually housed a collection of grocery lists, stray gardening gloves, and emergency snacks for the grandkids. As he started the engine, the dashboard lights glowed softly, casting an intimate spell within the confines of the car. Outside, the last vestiges of daylight had surrendered to a deep, velvety night, the kind where the stars seem close enough to touch. "Comfortable?" Richard asked, adjusting his rearview mirror. "Perfectly, thank you," I replied, settling into the plush seat. It felt good to be a passenger, to relinquish control for a little while. The initial part of the drive was filled with the usual post-party pleasantries. We talked about Linda's famous potato salad, Bob's over-enthusiastic grilling techniques, the surprising news that the Petersons' youngest was heading off to college. Easy conversation, the kind that flows between people who have a shared history, even if it's mostly through a third party. But as we left the familiar neighborhood streets and turned onto the longer stretch of road that led towards my home, a different kind of quiet began to settle between us. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, not an awkward one. It was more of a thoughtful quiet, the kind that allows for unspoken things to hover in the air, for introspection. The road unspooled before us, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the dark countryside. The trees on either side were dense, their leaves rustling softly in the night breeze, their shapes silhouetted against the starlit sky. I found myself watching Richard's hands on the steering wheel. Strong hands, capable. He drove smoothly, with an unhurried confidence that I found oddly calming. My own heart, I realized, was beating a little faster than usual, but not from fear. It was something else, a faint thrum of anticipation. I wasn't sure what I was anticipating. Maybe just a deeper conversation, like the one we'd had about movies earlier. Or maybe it was the simple, unexpected pleasure of this quiet companionship. The dashboard clock glowed 10:37 p.m. Tom would likely be asleep already, or at least in bed with his reading lamp on, probably a dry history book. Our evenings had fallen into a predictable pattern over the years. Comfortable, yes, but rarely surprising. Richard broke the silence, his voice still soft, but with a different timbre now, a little more personal. "You seem to enjoy yourself tonight, Jessica. More than usual, perhaps?" I turned to look at him, surprised by his observation. His face was partially illuminated by the dash lights, highlighting the gentle lines around his eyes. They were kind eyes, I thought again. Was it that obvious? I laughed a little. Yes, I suppose I did. It was a lovely evening, and our chat about Casablanca, it's been a long time since I talked to anyone who appreciates it the way you do. He smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes. It's a classic for a reason. They don't make them like that anymore. They certainly don't, I agreed, a touch of wistfulness in my voice. We were talking about movies, but somehow it felt like we were talking about something more, about a time when things felt different, perhaps more heartfelt, more significant. Or maybe I was just projecting my own quiet longings onto a simple conversation. The air in the car felt charged, not with overt tension, but with a subtle undercurrent of something. Something I couldn't quite name, but that made my skin tingle slightly. This wasn't just a ride home anymore. It was beginning to feel like a small journey into an unexpected territory. The road ahead seemed darker, more enclosed by the tall trees lining it, and the world outside the car faded into a blur of shadows and fleeting moonlight. Inside, though, it felt like a small, warm haven, cocooning us from the night. Richard didn't turn on the radio, and I was grateful for the absence of manufactured sound. The only noises were the quiet hum of the engine, the soft swish of tires on the pavement, and our own breathing, which seemed to fall into a gentle, unspoken rhythm. Tom mentioned you've been thinking about taking that art history course at the community college, Richard said, his voice a low murmur. I was surprised Tom had even remembered, let alone mentioned it to Richard. It was a small dream I'd nurtured quietly, something for myself, a little spark I'd been hesitant to fan into a flame. "Oh, yes," I said, a little shyly. "I've always loved art, but never really had the chance to study it properly. Life, you know. Life has a way of filling up all the spaces, doesn't it?" he mused, his gaze fixed on the road, but I felt his attention was also on me, on my words. But it's never too late to carve out a new space. His words resonated deep within me. Never too late. It was a phrase I'd told myself often, but hearing it from someone else, from Richard, it somehow carried more weight, more possibility. He wasn't just making polite conversation. It felt like he understood that small, flickering ambition within me. We passed the old mill, its dilapidated frame a stark silhouette against the sky. Usually it was just a landmark on the way home, but tonight it seemed almost romantic in its desolation, a reminder of times past, of stories held within its aging timbers. and I couldn't help but feel that this ride, this unexpected interlude with Richard, was becoming a small story of its own, one I hadn't anticipated when I'd accepted his kind offer. The air was thick with unspoken thoughts, with a connection that was growing with every mile we traveled. Silent and profound, beneath the vast, star-dusted canvas of the night. I had no idea where this feeling was leading, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of quiet excitement, a gentle unfurling in my soul. This quick ride home was already turning into something much more than I could have ever predicted. The conversation flowed more easily after that, meandering through topics light and serious. We talked about our children. His were grown and living in different states. Mine were closer, but busy with their own lives and young families. We found common ground in the bittersweet experience of watching your children forge their own paths, the pride mixed with a quiet sense of being left, just a little behind. Richard spoke with a gentle wisdom about it, a kind of acceptance that I was still striding for. He had a way of listening, truly listening, that made me feel heard in a way I hadn't in a long time. Tom was a good man, my Tom, but he wasn't always the best listener, especially when it came to the more nuanced, emotional currents of life. He was a man of action, of solutions, not always of patient understanding. Richard, it seemed, possessed that rare quality in abundance. It's the small things, isn't it? I found myself saying, thinking aloud more than anything. The little moments you miss, like reading bedtime stories or the chaos of school mornings. Richard nodded, his eyes briefly meeting mine with a look of profound understanding. You invest so much of yourself, your heart, into raising them, and then, one day, that part of your life, it doesn't stop, but it changes. It becomes quieter. Exactly, I whispered, feeling a surprising well of emotion. It wasn't sadness precisely, but a poignant recognition of a chapter closed. To share that with someone who truly got it, without having to explain or justify the feeling, was a gift. The road began to climb a little, winding through a more sparsely populated area. The houses were fewer, set further back from the road, their lights like distant, friendly stars. I realized we were taking a slightly different route than I usually did, a more scenic, perhaps slightly longer way. I didn't comment on it. A part of me didn't want the ride to end just yet. "This road is beautiful at night, isn't it?" Richard remarked, as if sensing my thoughts. "I sometimes come this way just to clear my head." "It is lovely," I agreed, looking out at the moon-silvered fields and the dark, undulating lawn of the hills in the distance. "I usually stick to the main road, faster, I suppose." "Faster isn't always better," he said softly, and the words hung in the air, imbued with a meaning that seemed to extend far beyond our choice of route. We lapsed back into a comfortable silence, but it was a silence now filled with a palpable connection. It was as if our earlier conversation had opened a door between us, a space where we could exist without the need for constant chatter, understanding each other on a deeper, more intuitive level. I felt a warmth spreading through me, a sense of ease, and dare I say, happiness. That was both surprising and deeply welcome. Then a light drizzle began to fall, fat drops splattering against the windshield. Richard switched on the wipers, their rhythmic swish-swish adding another layer to the intimate atmosphere within the car. The rain intensified quickly, blurring the world outside into streaks of light and shadow. It was as if the weather itself was conspiring to isolate us further, to create a private world just for the two of us. "Looks like we've run into a bit of a shower," Richard said, his voice calm and unperturbed. He slowed the car slightly, his focus on the increasingly slick road. The rain was coming down hard now, drumming on the roof, a wild, elemental sound that was both exhilarating and a little unnerving. Visibility dropped, and the familiar landmarks I would have expected to see were obscured by the downpour. I wasn't worried, though. Richard's steady presence beside me, his competent handling of the car, was incredibly reassuring. "It's quite a storm," I murmured, watching the rain lash against the windows. "Came out of nowhere." "Summer storms," he said. "They can be like that. Intense, but often quick to pass." He was right, of course. But in that moment, cocooned in the warm, dry car with the storm raging outside, it felt like we were in the heart of something significant, something that might not pass so quickly or leave things quite as they were before. The subtle tension I'd felt earlier had transformed, deepened by the shared experience of the sudden storm. It was no longer just a feeling of anticipation, but a growing awareness of a profound, unexpected connection forming between us. A connection that felt both thrilling and a little bit dangerous, not because of any ill intent, but because of its sheer, undeniable power. It was the kind of connection that could quietly change everything. And the thought, instead of alarming me, the night was far from over, and this quick ride home was becoming an odyssey of the heart. The rain showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it grew heavier, the drumming on the roof becoming a relentless roar. The wipers fought a valiant but losing battle against the deluge, and the road ahead was a shimmering, indistinct ribbon. Richard, ever calm, slowed the car further. "You know," he said, his voice still even but with a new note of caution, "it might be wise to pull over for a few minutes, just until this worst part passes. It's getting a bit tricky to see properly." I nodded in agreement, peering through the rain-lashed windshield. "Yes, I think you're right. It's a real downpour." My heart gave a little flutter, pulling over, stopping. It felt significant. He scanned the roadside and a moment later spotted a small, unpaved pull-off area, likely an old farm gate entrance, partially sheltered by a canopy of large oak trees. He maneuvered the car carefully onto the muddy track, the tires spinning a little before finding purchase. He brought the car to a halt, the engine still idling, the wipers still swishing rhythmically. We were tucked away from the main road, shielded to some extent by the dense foliage of the oaks, though the rain still hammered down around us. With the car stationary, the sound of the storm seemed to envelop us completely. It was a wild, elemental symphony, and we were in the quiet eye of it, two souls in a small, warm arc. Richard switched off the headlights, leaving only the soft glow of the dashboard to illuminate the interior. The intimacy of the space intensified. "Well," he said, turning slightly in his seat to face me more directly, "this is cozy." A slight smile played on his lips, but his eyes were serious, thoughtful. "It is," I agreed, my voice a little softer than I intended. I could feel the warmth radiating from him, the subtle scent of his cologne, mixed with the earthy smell of rain-soaked ground filtering in. My senses felt heightened, every small detail amplified. "Thank you for pulling over. That was getting a bit intense." "No problem at all. Safety first," he said, though the phrase sounded almost comically mundane in the face of the charged atmosphere between us. We sat in silence for a few moments, listening to the storm. The only sounds were the rain, the wipers, and the quiet thrum of the engine, and my own heartbeat, which seemed to be trying to keep time with the frantic drumming on the roof. I found myself studying his profile in the dim light. The strong line of his jaw, the way his hair, slightly damp from his earlier dash to the car, curled a little at the temples. He was a handsome man, I realized, not in a flashy way, but in a quiet, dignified manner. It was a realization that felt strangely new, even though I'd known him for years. "This reminds me," he began, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the small space, "of a time when I was a kid. My dad and I got caught in a thunderstorm, just like this on a fishing trip. We sheltered under a big old canvas tarp in his boat. The world just disappeared outside that little cocoon." I listened, captivated as he spoke. He wasn't just making small talk to fill the silence. He was sharing a piece of himself, a memory. "What did you do?" I asked, We just sat there, he said, a nostalgic look in his eyes. Listened to the rain, told stories. It was one of those perfect moments, you know? Simple, unexpected. I do know, I said, and I did. I had my own collection of such moments tucked away like precious jewels. His sharing of this memory felt like an invitation, an opening. It's funny, I found myself saying, the words tumbling out before I could second guess them. How life gets so busy, so scheduled. We forget to just sit sometimes, to just listen to the rain. My gaze drifted to the window, to the blurred dancing patterns of water. He turned more fully towards me, his arm resting on the back of his seat, his fingers just inches from my shoulder. I could feel the subtle shift in energy, a drawing closer, not just physically, but emotionally. We do, he agreed, his voice gentle. We get caught up in the doing, and we forget the being. His eyes held mine. In the dim light, they seemed to hold a universe of understanding, of shared feeling. The air was thick with it. This was the unthinkable, not some sordid transgression, but this sudden, profound, and utterly unexpected emotional intimacy with my husband's friend. It was the realization that a connection like this could exist, so potent and so real, outside the established boundaries of my life. It was the feeling of being seen, truly seen, by someone in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. My breath hitched. I felt as if I were on the edge of a precipice, looking down into something deep and unknown. There was no fear of falling, only a strange, compelling pull. The subtle tension that had been building all evening had coalesced into this single, powerful moment. The world outside, with its storm and its obligations, faded away. There was only this small, warm space, the sound of the rain, and Richard's gaze holding mine. "Jessica," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, and my name on his lips sounded different, imbued with a tenderness that made my heart ache in a way I couldn't explain. He didn't say anything more for a long moment. He didn't have to. His eyes, his presence said it all. There was an understanding passing between us that transcended words. It was a recognition of a shared loneliness, perhaps, or a shared yearning for something more, something deeper. I didn't know how long we sat there like that, suspended in time, the storm raging around us, a silent conversation passing between our souls. It could have been minutes or an eternity. The intensity of it was almost unbearable, yet I didn't want it to end. This moment felt precious, a rare alignment of circumstance and emotion. It was a personal discovery, this unfolding of feeling, this realization of a part of myself I had perhaps kept dormant for too long. And it was happening with Richard, a man I had known for years, yet felt I was only truly meeting for the first time tonight. The respect between us was palpable. There was no pressure, no untoward suggestion, only this deep, resonant, emotional connection. The climax of the evening wasn't an action, but a profound, shared stillness, a mutual acknowledgement of something powerful and beautiful that had unexpectedly bloomed between us in the heart of a summer storm. The rain began to soften, its furious drumming on the roof subsiding to a gentler patter. The worst of the storm was passing, just as Richard had predicted. The world outside slowly started to re-emerge from the blur, the trees taking shape again, the distant lights becoming clearer. It felt like waking from a dream, a beautiful, intense dream I wasn't quite ready to leave. Richard let out a slow breath, the sound barely audible, and the spell, though not entirely broken, shifted. He turned his gaze towards the windshield. "Looks like it's easing up," he said, his voice still soft, but with a touch of its earlier practicality returning. "Yes," I replied, my own voice a little husky. I cleared my throat. "It seems to be." I felt a strange mixture of relief and a quiet sort of regret. The intensity of the moment had been profound, almost overwhelming, and a part of me knew it couldn't last, but another part wished it could have lingered just a little longer. He reached forward and switched the headlights back on, their beams cutting through the now lighter rain. The interior of the car felt a fraction brighter, a little more ordinary. He put the car into gear. "Shall we attempt the rest of the journey?" he asked, a slight, almost shy smile touching his lips as he glanced at me. "I think we can," I said, matching his smile. The unspoken understanding was still there, a warm current flowing between us. But the rawness of the previous moments had been gently overlaid with a sense of shared experience, a secret memory created. He navigated us carefully back onto the road. The asphalt glistened under the streetlights that were beginning to appear as we neared the more populated areas closer to my home. The drive continued in a comfortable quiet for a while. The earlier, easy conversation didn't immediately resume, but the silence was different now. It wasn't expectant or searching. It was full, resonant with all that had passed between us, unspoken in the shelter of the storm. I found myself replaying those intense minutes in my mind, the way his eyes had held mine, the feeling of being so completely understood without uttering a word. It was a powerful sensation, one that had shaken me to my core, not in a frightening way, but in a way that awakens you to new possibilities, new depths within yourself. I felt a profound sense of connection to Richard, a connection I knew would not simply evaporate when the ride ended. It was something I would carry with me. As we turned onto my street, a familiar pang of something pricked at me. Reality, home, Tom, the life I would step back into in a few short minutes. It wasn't that I dreaded it, not at all. I loved my husband, my home, but something had undeniably shifted within me tonight. This experience with Richard had opened a window in a room I hadn't even realized had felt a little stuffy. He pulled up to my curb under the gentle glow of our porch light, which I'd left on. He turned off the engine, and the silence that descended was the silence of arrival, of an ending. "Well, here we are," he said, his voice gentle. He turned to me, and in the dim light from the street lamp, I could see the warmth in his eyes, a lingering echo of the connection we'd shared. "Thank you, Richard," I said, my voice sincere. "Thank you for the ride and for waiting out the storm." I hoped he understood the deeper meaning in my words. "It was my pleasure, Jessica," he replied, and I knew he did. Truly. There was a moment of hesitation. What now? What did one say after sharing something so significant, yet so unspoken? I reached for the door handle. "I'll let Tom know you saw me home safe," I said. "I'll let Tom know you saw me home safe," I said. "Good," he nodded. "And Jessica," he paused, and I waited, my heart giving a little flutter. "About that art history course, you should do it." A genuine smile spread across my face. It was the perfect thing for him to say, a gentle encouragement that acknowledged my small dream, a continuation of the support he'd shown earlier. It brought things back to a safe, yet still caring place. "I think I will," I said, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "Thank you." "Get some rest," he said. "You too." I opened the door and stepped out into the damp, clean air. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving behind the fresh scent of wet earth and blooming night jasmine from my garden. I turned back to wave as he started the engine. He gave a small nod and a wave in return, and then he drove away, his taillights disappearing around the corner. I stood there for a moment on the sidewalk, the house keys feeling cool in my hand. The world around me looked the same, yet it felt different. I felt different. I walked up the path to my front door, a sense of quiet reflection settling over me. Inside, the house was quiet. Tom, as predicted, was asleep, his gentle snores a familiar soundtrack to my nights. I walked through the darkened rooms, my home, filled with the memories of a long life lived, a good life. But tonight, a new layer had been added to my understanding of myself, of connection. The experience with Richard hadn't been about infidelity or betrayal. It had been about a profound human connection, unexpected and deeply emotional. It was about being seen, being understood, about sharing a moment of vulnerability and grace in the midst of a summer storm. It was a reminder that even in the comfortable routines of a long-settled life, there was still room for personal discovery, for the heart to be touched in surprising ways. I knew things wouldn't be drastically different in my day-to-day life. I wouldn't abandon my marriage or pursue some dramatic new path, but I also knew I wouldn't forget this night. Richard's kindness, his understanding, the sheer intensity of that shared moment in the rain, it had awakened something in me. A renewed sense of my own inner life, my own emotional landscape. Perhaps this was the unthinkable, that such a deep, respectful connection could form so unexpectedly, that it could illuminate parts of myself I'd allowed to dim. And in that illumination, there was growth. There was a new appreciation for the quiet complexities of the human heart, mine included. I went to bed that night with a sense of peace and a quiet excitement for the art history course I now knew with certainty I would take. The ride home had ended, but a new, more personal journey was just beginning.